The small town of Montgomery, Vermont wears a quiet mask. White steeples, winding roads, and snow-laced mountains paint a postcard-perfect picture. But the truth, as we've learned, is rarely that picturesque. On March 19th, 2004, Brianna Maitland vanished without a trace. Her car was found backed into an abandoned barn, the rear end embedded into the wall like a warning. We've already walked through her last day and peeled back the layers of her personal life. Now we descend into the part of the story that makes small-town authorities squirm, the world of drugs, debts, and the dangerous people who don't like to be talked about. In this episode, we're exploring the underbelly of Franklin County, where teenage dealers, addicted acquaintances, and older men with reputations all move in the same shadowy circles. Brianna's name is whispered in the same breath as cocaine rings, stolen money, and enforcers who didn't play nice. Some say she owed the wrong people. Others say she knew too much. The deeper you dig, the more rot you find beneath the surface. This is Dark Dialogue, Brianna Maitland, Episode 3, Small Town Secrets, Drugs, Debt, and Disappearances. So let's open the case. Angela, how's it going? Good to see you.
It's going well. I'm good. It's good to see you too.
Ready to get to the end of the week? I'm quite certain of that.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes. I'm very excited for this weekend.
Any big weekend plans or just no plans?
No. I actually plan to watch all the creepy shit, do some chores, and crochet a whole crap ton of stuff.
Are you gonna watch the creepy shit that I've recommended like 70 times?
I need to know the stuff that we're not watching together so I can watch it separate.
Which does remind me, I have everything in place for the new show that we have to work, so...
Yes, I need to know what to watch without you, and yes, that will go on my list.
Perfect.
But I am alone this weekend-ish, and no one to stop me from watching the creepy shit, so that's what's happening.
Nice. It sounds like a good weekend.
Yeah.
Good. So, I feel like this episode might warrant something stronger than coffee.
I had my Ativan on board, so I apologize.
Well,
I apologize now for
you should be ready to go then.
I am ready, but random weirdness will ensue.
Well, that's okay. We're used to that.
That's true. That's true.
So you ready to jump feet first into this?
He remembered. I almost could do a cartwheel, so let's just go.
Let's get after it then. So, welcome to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm your host, Angela. And alongside John, as always, we're here to explore the stories that keep you up at night. Tales of disappearances, deception, and the darkness that sometimes lives right next door.
Each episode, we examine the cases that refuse to be forgotten, unanswered questions, overlooked evidence, and the lives left in limbo. We speak for the missing and the silenced.
So, like we said, grab your headphones, pour something strong, or sweet, dim the lights, and settle in for a conversation that doesn't flinch from the truth. This is Dark Dialogue. Let's step into the darkness together.
So we started with episode number 1, where we kind of got the lay of the land. We learned about Brianna and stuff like that. Then we talked about the timeline and everything that led up to her disappearance and the weird-ass shit that was at the scene, the crazy way that the car was found, all that kind of stuff. So this week, we have to talk about the whole drug aspect of this case. It doesn't really matter if we believe it, don't believe it. It's such a huge part of the case that it just can't be left unsaid.
You gotta get it out there.
Right, yeah, we've got to talk about it. So, as I've said in previous episodes, during this period of time in the early 2000s, Vermont was in trouble as far as drugs go. I don't know now if it's as bad as it was, but the way that I heard it described, it really kind of reminds me of so many Wyoming communities, honestly.
Yeah.
Including this one. And that is, actually, I think it was worse than here, because
here's on its way to worse.
Yeah, but they were saying that, like kids in Vermont, in this area of Vermont, they had to like drive to go to a movie. I mean, there was literally nothing for these kids to do, nothing. And so they'd have to take a road trip to go to the movies. You know, there was no, we talked about, you know, driving to Burlington in order to go to the shopping mall. You know, that was 40 some odd miles away or whatever. You know, they said that they'd have to drive over an hour to go to a live concert, which that kind of fits with pretty much everywhere in Wyoming, with the exception of maybe Casper and Cheyenne, but
possibly Gillette.
Maybe. I never hear of any like big shows in Gillette. Maybe there is.
I don't know about a show, but Randy Travis is supposed to be in Gillette.
He's still playing?
See, that's the thing, is I don't know about show, but he's supposed to appear. They've done some stuff with him vocally and another artist. It's some AI stuff, but yeah, he's still kind of appearing. He actually has a new song out.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. I thought he was in pretty rough shape.
He kind of is, but he's still trying.
Huh? Well, there you have it. So anyway, northern Vermont, up in this area, it was really rural, and the kids just didn't have anything to do. And so any place you have a market, somebody's going to come and fill that market.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened here. So we have the two pieces of shit that I've talked about, I think, on every episode. And unfortunately, their names just continue to come up in her case over and over again. And that's Ramon Ryans, who went by the name Street, and Nathaniel Jackson, who went by the name Lowe.
Such ridiculous names, too.
And they always are.
They are.
So, I don't know. But, so these two asshats, and we'll be talking about as much about their history as I was able to find, which was damn little. But they're both from Queens, New York, and they come up into this area just to deal crack. And they found themselves... Yeah, they found themselves a pretty big market up there. So the kind of the lay of the land is pieces of shit like these guys go to these small towns, make friends with the kids, get them hooked, and then supply them. That's kind of the business model.
Get them feeling like no one else cares about them as much as they do. And
yeah, exactly. Whatever. I mean, they're way...
They don't fit in anywhere but here.
Yeah, they're way better profilers than the FBI.
It's disgusting.
By far. So it might be that, but they're able to spend a very little bit of time with like a high school or college age kid and figure out what they're missing and what they need, and then offer it to them, whether it be friends, acceptance, excitement, whatever the case may be. Douchebags like this are really good profilers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the reasons that John Douglas went and interviewed Ed Kemper, because he's a really good profiler. The pieces of shit in this world recognize other pieces of shit and are able to profile them quite well. So these guys are no different. They went up, they profiled these kids, they got them addicted to crack, and then, they have a huge customer base. So, and there's other players in this community that we'll be talking about: Stephanie Machia, Timothy Powell. There's a whole list of names that we'll be talking about. But so I really wasn't able to link Ryans and Jackson to a larger organization. I think that they were linked in some way. And we know that there are some pretty large and structured gangs in the New York community, be it the Bloods or the Crips or the Latin gangs or whatever. But I wasn't able to tie these two dipshits to a gang like that specifically. Okay. So it's possibly they weren't gang related. It's possible that they weren't necessarily gang members, but had ties to gangs like that.
Yeah.
It's
supplying them.
Yeah, I mean, very likely you have somebody that's supplying these douchebags, that's part of a large organization that would be linked to. And it might not be one of the gangs I mentioned. It might be some shit I've never even heard of. Who knows?
Well, you've heard of more than me, we learned. So
I don't think that takes a whole lot, though, because I think you've only heard like 2. So,
This is true.
but anyway, I wasn't able to confirm that they were drug or that they were gang members specifically. It really doesn't matter. They were douchebags.
Yes.
And they were dealing drugs in that area. Like I said, they both come out of Queens, New York, and they at least worked in a drug pipeline in that area. Now, whether that pipeline went ahead and moved drugs farther up north and into Canada and stuff, I have my suspicions. Logistically, it makes a lot of sense, but there was, unless you get in there and, I don't know, get somebody undercover or something and break that shit apart. I mean, that's stuff that the FBI has been trying to do with all kinds of organized crime for years and years and years. So suspicions don't really matter. It's whatever you can prove, but it doesn't really matter one way or the other, because we know that they were pieces of shit, and we know that they were involved in the drug trade. So in doing my research, the gangs that came up that really seemed to have run the drug trade in that area, early 2000s, would have been, like I mentioned, the Bloods, the Crips, the Latin Kings, and then there's always the Mexican drug trafficking organizations that are tied to the cartels in Mexico. They've been around for ages. And then there's just local unaffiliated groups or individuals. Is all you need is a contact that's a supplier, and then you buy your shit from them and you mark it up and you sell it to somebody else, and that's just kind of how it works. So it seems to have been a really strong market for these guys. So they moved up there and they rented this house on Reservoir Road, which was kind of a farmhouse that they were living in at the time. And it was a party house. So they'd throw parties out there. All these kids, Brianna was known to go to parties at that house. Seems like pretty much all of these kids would go to parties at that house. So no doubt that their main products were marijuana, obviously, and then crack cocaine. Whether they moved any other kind of drugs or anything during this period of time, I really wasn't able to find that out. There seems to have been a presence of like meth and that kind of stuff, and pretty much anywhere where you find crack cocaine, you're going to be able to find pretty much anything that you want.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And, like in that community, so often is the case that if they move into an area and they're dealing crack, but they know that they've recognized that 4 or 5 different kids love meth and are strung out on meth, then they're going to start looking to get their hands on some meth too. So
there's always money on the table.
No, they're going to supply whatever the demand is. So Ramon Lyons, who will be referred to as piece of shit number 1, and has been referred to as piece of shit number 1. I couldn't find hardly shit about him. I know that he grew up in Queens, New York. Other than that, I really have no idea.
Is he still alive?
Unfortunately, yeah, the piece of shit's still kicking around somewhere, as far as I could tell, but I think so.
Yeah.
And it seems like he relocated to Vermont with Nathaniel Jackson, specifically to sell drugs. It seems like that was the reason for the move.
Okay.
How they identified that market, I really don't know. But during this period of time, and probably still, these city organizations were looking to branch out into the more rural areas. They're always trying to extend their reach, grow their customer base, sell more shit to more kids. So I don't think that it was any different now than it is any different then than it is now. It just is the nature of the beast.
Okay.
So this piece of shit moves up there with Jackson. They rent the house on Reservoir Road, which was in Berkshire, Vermont, approximately 10 miles from Montgomery. So we've got all these tiny little towns, and they're all just kind of crammed together. So it seems like every time we talk about somebody else, we talk about a new little town.
Yeah.
But Like I said in the beginning, he went by the name Street, and I think it was like East or K Street or E Street or some letter Street. It's probably where he grew up as a kid or some shit like that. I don't know.
But don't they like do? I'm about to show how drug illiterate I am, and I'm proud of it. Thank you very much. But isn't it like they call special case ketamine or something?
Oh yeah, they have different drugs.
So maybe it's like his drug of choice is the letter.
Maybe, but one thing I'll tell you, and again,
why am I trying to figure it out? I don't know.
And again, I couldn't confirm or not that these guys were part of a gang, but oftentimes the area where somebody lives, they're very territorial in their areas. And so, it could have been something linked to that. I mean, if you look back in early gang history, a lot of them were basically a block or a certain area of town, and they basically defended their portion of town from the neighboring portion of town. And so it is very territorial in these cities, especially when you get into the gang community. So it could have been linked to the street he grew up on. It could have been linked to who the hell knows, and who really gives a shit.
I don't know why I was trying to figure it out, but for some reason my brain latched on and said, let's figure it out.
So he is the one that Brianna seems to have known the best.
That she had a relationship with?
I don't think they really had a relationship as far as like the romantic variety. I can't really confirm or deny that, but I haven't seen that anywhere.
Okay.
What I did see is that her friend Jillian Stout said that she was introduced to Ryan's by Brianna when Brianna and Ryan's came over together. So, and they were just alone together. So from that, we can pretty well, reach the conclusion that they were running around together, at least some of the time. We know that they partied together, and so they could have just been acquaintances. There could have been, I don't know, there could have been a romantic connection. There may not have been. As far as that goes, I could find nothing to support that aspect of it at all. But they were running around together, and he definitely supplied her with drugs, so whatever all that means. But we know that she was strongly associated with him. And so, because he's living with piece of shit number 2, she definitely would have known that piece of shit and probably, ran around with him and stuff. Although maybe they didn't spend time alone together, they definitely would have known each other,
right?
Without a doubt. And so, both of them left this area. So Ryan's, after the whole thing with Brianna went down, I mean, the worst thing that can happen for a drug dealer is everybody in town starts suspecting them of killing somebody.
Right.
In which case, the cops are going to be looking very hard at them. And we'll be talking about it, but, shortly after this, and I mentioned it before, so it's not like it's a cliffhanger or anything, that Bruce received an anonymous tip that Brianna was being held in the basement of their house. And so the cops, quote unquote, raided it. Not a good thing if you're a drug dealer, to have cops raiding your house, to be being arrested for possession and intent to sell and all this other shit. So right after this, they moved. So dipshit number 1, Ramon Ryans, he moved to, what the hell's the name of the town where the mall is at?
Burlington.
Yeah. So he moved to Burlington. Dipshit number 2, Nathaniel Jackson, I don't know exactly when, but he moved to the Carolinas. I don't know which one. I don't really give a shit. Right. But he moved out of there, and Ryan's moved out of there as well. And so we'll talk about Nathaniel Jackson next, but there's really not too much to say. His history kind of is a mirror image of shithead number 1, because he grew up in Queens, New York, couldn't find anything about his childhood, and he moved up to Vermont for the same reason, to peddle drugs to a bunch of kids. His dumbass name is Low, which Good guess.
Fitting.
Where in the hell that comes from, I have no freaking clue. He's a real winner, though. And then everything else pretty much mirrors that. They peddle drugs up there for this duration of time. And then when the heat got too hot, basically, they both got the hell out of there. So the two of these dipshits were living in that farmhouse on Reservoir Road, like I told you, with a couple of other people. One of those people is a woman by the name of Stephanie Machia, and she was living at the Reservoir House with Jackson and Ryan's. And, you know, all of these asshats, there's no shit about them. You can't find anything about their childhoods or anything. I even had a very hard time finding court records and stuff for this bunch of souls. Yes. And as crazy as it seems, I couldn't hardly find pictures. I found one picture of Ramon Ryans and one picture of Nathaniel Jackson, and that was pretty much it. So
I feel like they should be peppered with court documents and
I know that they are, but why they're not more widely available, I just don't know. But they're not. And maybe it's a Vermont thing. Maybe they don't publicize it because...
Did you look in New York?
In New York? Mm-hmm. You know, I looked everywhere that I knew that they had lived. I don't know of any arrests in New York. They may or may not have. And then the other problem that I have is Nathaniel Jackson is a pretty freaking common name. Yeah. And so you end up wading through a whole shit ton of them. And Ramon Ryans is just kind of like, there's just nothing there. There's just nothing about this douchebag.
It just doesn't exist.
With everything that he's been affiliated with and the shit that has gone down around him, it's very, very surprising. But, you know, you can find him in like Reddit threads and that kind of shit and a lot of conversation surrounding the Brianna Maitland case. But as far as finding official documents, there ain't hardly shit, which really, really surprises me. Because usually you're able to pretty easily find court documents. They're publicly available, almost always. So it's usually not that too difficult to find them, but it's different here with this whole bunch of ass clowns. It's way different. So anyway, Stephanie Machia was living with Ryans and Jackson, and she was also involved in the whole drug trade. And she would have been an acquaintance of Brianna too. They likely knew each other through that local drug scene. And like I said before, Brianna attended several parties at that house. So Stephanie would have been present at that. So they would have known each other. But other than the anonymous tip that come in that led to the search of the house on Reservoir Road, there really isn't much else. And that kind of just linked everybody in that house to her murder. Right. But, you know, there was never anything that could ever be found to corroborate any of that kind of stuff. So I have no idea where her current whereabouts are. I don't know. And, you know, that
was kind of dissolved into nothing.
Well, and the truth of the matter is that, you know, people like this, if she got out of the drug scene, if any of them got out of the drug scene and cleaned their life up and everything, they would have a bigger presence. Mm-hmm. Usually, you know, you'd be able to find Facebook pages and shit like that from them. But if they're just crackheads that are freaking, you know, high on the street,
nobody's gonna know.
And so there's just not a lot of information about any of these asshats. And then the fourth one that we need to talk about is a guy by the name of Timothy Powell. He was also living at the Reservoir Road house. I'm not going to say all of the same things all over again with him because it's pretty much all exactly the same. He would have known Brianna. He was living there. But I couldn't find really anything about his childhood or how he grew up or what happened to him after all of that. So I really have no freaking clue. What I do know is that in April, I think it was April 14th, Bruce gets a phone call, an anonymous phone call that says that Brianna is being held at the farmhouse on Reservoir Road. So he calls the Vermont State Police and says, either you go search that house or I will, which I realize I've already told this story, but just to kind of a recap. And so the cops were like, okay, we'll go look at it. And so they went with Fish and Game agents and Border Patrol. And it sounds to me like, at first I was thinking, well, maybe that's an indication that they were moving drugs up into Canada because Border Patrol's involved.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to researching it, it's a very small force, both state police and the local police up there. And so it's pretty common for them to call in Fish and Game agents and Border Patrol as backup on something like this, just to put enough bodies on the ground to do something like this. So they went to the house on Reservoir Road, I believe on April the 15th, and knocked on the door, and dipshit number one and dipshit number two said, yeah, come on in, do a search. We ain't got her. So they went in, they did the search. And from what I understand, they then left and then got a search warrant because of the shit that they'd seen when they were looking through the house, came back with a search warrant. That's when they arrested everybody. And so it sounds like pretty much everybody just made a plea deal. There wasn't huge charges out of this. And, you know, like Ryan's was charged to, it was like everything but 45 days. And then he got time served for the 45 days. So he really didn't do any time.
Ridiculous.
And that's it. That's what I was thinking too. It's such a bunch of bullshit. But it sounds to me like it was pretty freaking questionable whether they were going to be able to get a conviction on any of this, because it came in as an anonymous tip to Bruce Maitland. It wasn't even an anonymous tip to the state police. So that's questionable whether that would have been enough probable cause to get a search warrant anyway. And then because of that tip, that's when they saw the drugs. And because they saw the drugs, they were able to get the search warrant. But it's all considered fruit from the poisonous tree. So if that initial search was ruled to be illegal, everything that came out of that search would have been inadmissible in court.
Right.
So it sounds like they kind of thought that it was questionable anyway. So they just took what they could get, which was just basically a mark on their record.
Yeah.
Because none of them really did any significant time or
got watched and yeah.
Yeah. And none of them really got into any kind of serious trouble. And like I said, Ryan's, I think, got the most, and he got a suspended sentence. So they pretty much did nothing.
Poor guy.
So yeah, it was a little bit of a joke, but when you dig into it, it kind of makes sense why it played out that way.
Okay.
Because if they knew that they weren't going to get a conviction anyway, then what the hell's the point?
Right.
So might as well take what you can get.
Just scar them up a little bit. Right.
And then the next asshat that we have to talk about is a douchebag by the name of Jorge Istoto. And he went by the name Joker. And so this guy really sounds like he's a peach. But anyway, from what I could get, and this is not confirmed, but I think it's probably true, and that is that he grew up in Puerto Rico, and while in Puerto Rico, he saw his mom dragged out of the house in front of him and executed in the street. So that's kind of his childhood, which...
I'll mess somebody up.
Yeah, isn't really the best childhood. And this douchebag was an associate of dipshit 1 and dipshit 2, so now we're adding dipshit number 3. So all of these guys were kind of affiliated with each other, at least loosely, and I couldn't find much else about him, but he did, when he was in jail, he did basically take credit for killing Brianna. And so that's how...
the guy, okay.
Yeah, that's how he gets drug into this story. And he apparently said it on multiple different occasions. And He's been pretty well cleared. I think the cops and the FBI have both come out and said he didn't have anything to do with it. He just has a big mouth and wants to talk tough, which is what he said when they questioned him. He was like, yeah, I was just,
trying to scare people,
blowing smoke and trying to sound tougher than I really am. Or I don't know, maybe he is tough. I don't know. If you have a childhood like that, kind of everything's off the table. So
yeah, you're probably not soft.
Exactly. But anyway, it doesn't sound like he had a whole hell of like he had anything to do with it, but he could have. But he was released from either jail or prison like 24 hours before her disappearance. So he would have literally had to have booked it down to Montgomery to kidnap and kill presumably kill this 17-year-old girl for whatever reason.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says, Brianna owed him a shit ton of money or that they even knew each other at all. And there's nothing that really indicates they did know each other. So dipshit number 3 knew dipshit number 1 and dipshit number 2. And that's about it. There's nothing saying that Joker was often at these parties and stuff. He could have been. They may have met. They might have known each other, but there's nothing that links them together. With Ryan's and Brianna, we have a witness who is pretty damn reliable, who was a friend who isn't a freaking drug-addled lunatic. She's solid. She's, you watch interviews with her, you can tell she's got her shit together. She's, and at this point, she's a grown woman. I think she has a family now and everything. So, she is a reliable witness. And I think she would have said, obviously, I think we can trust what she says about Ryan's being introduced to her by Brianna. She probably would have said, oh yeah, Joker, that dipshit. Yeah, she was running around with him too. But there's nothing like that ties this Joker clown to Brianna in any way, other than him having a really big freaking mouth. And that happens all the time.
Right.
Especially in jail or in prison or something, where somebody's just trying to sound tough or whatever, and so they make this shit up. And that's really what I think is the case with this dipshit. Other than that, they really aren't linked.
Gotcha.
So, we went through the whole cast of asshats last episode. We're kind of doing it again this episode, but for a little bit of a different reason.
Okay.
And so the other one would be Michael Stebbins, which, if you remember, in last week's episode, we talked about him being the boyfriend of Keely LaCroix.
Oh,
Brianna, quote unquote, spent time with when Keely was out of town. He is kind of the reason for the,
because she lived with his parents.
No.
Oh,
This is Keely's boyfriend.
oh, okay.
At the time that this is why Keely punched Brianna, is because she apparently, and I did find out a little bit more about this. Apparently, Brianna stayed at his house while Keely was out of town.
Okay.
And that was the genesis of that whole big fight thing. But this piece of shit was associated with the drug trafficking network in Franklin County during this period of time. And, he was centered around the same social circle and criminal circle with dipshit 1, dipshit 2, Ramon Ryans, Nathaniel Jackson, Stephanie Machia, Timothy Powell, potentially this Joker asshat, but definitely those 4. And was apparently engaged in the distribution and use of crack cocaine and marijuana. And so he likely was participating in all sorts of drug-related activities at the parties and the different locations, but at that Reservoir Roadhouse with the 2 dipshits. And his connection to Brianna is pretty freaking solid, We know that he was dating Keely, and this part gets so confusing when you start researching this, because a large portion of the sources claim that it was James Robitaille that was dating Keely. He was the reason for the fight.
I think that's why I got confused.
Yeah, because he had apparently dated them both as well. But when you really...
Small towns.
Yeah, small towns and teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you really dig into it, though, I feel very confident that it was Stebbins that was dating Keely at the time that she left town. He is the one that whatever happened with Brianna happened, and Keely got pissed because of it. So it wasn't James. It seems like it was Michael Stebbins. So... And this is what I warned you last week. It gets so confusing. I've been, up to my ears in this case now for the last several weeks, and I still get confused. I'm like, wait, I want to go back to my notes and be like, no, this dipshit is okay. Yeah. And I pissed myself off the other day because I was like Googling this name, and I kept Googling it, and nothing was coming up. And I was like, son of a bitch. And so I went back to my notes.
You mixed two names?
I mixed two names together and was searching like one first name and somebody else's last.
I've done that.
But there's just so many freaking names in this case that it's so hard to keep them all straight. So I really apologize to the listeners, because I'm sure that they're all like, wait, what? Who the hell is...
No notebooks out.
Yeah. Who the hell is who, and how does everybody fit in? And you're not alone. And honestly, listening to interviews with both Lou Berry and Greg Overacker, they say the same thing. Like, they'll be talking to each other and be like, wait, well, how does this person fit in this shit? And wait, what? It's just so convoluted. And I think that, like I said, with teenagers' lives, you do that anyway. I can remember, talking, well, even still, but especially when my kids were in their teenage years, and especially my girls, they'd be saying, this person or that person, and be like, okay, no, wait, what? Okay, who was that again?
Yeah.
Or it would be
like, Dad.
Yeah. Or you'd be like, wait a minute. I thought like since last month you guys were talking to each other. And it's like, no,
keep up, Dad.
Friends now. Oh, yeah, I should have known.
What are you here for?
Yeah, so
Dad.
You have that whole aspect. You have the teenage aspect. And then you have the drug scene aspect, which is just as freaking bad, where these people kind of come into the drug scene and out of the drug scene, and they're either, part of the group, or they're on the outs with the groups. And so it's just so confusing.
And being in and out with the group just like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, kind of like what happened with Brianna. With everything that happened with Keely, she was kind of on the outs with at least her friend group. I'm sure that her drug dealers would be more than happy to supply her with drugs, but, like her quote-unquote friend group wasn't really hanging out with her or anything. And, the sad part of that is that also means that she was able to go so long being missing without it being discovered, because if you've got like a bunch of solid friends that you're talking to every day and all that kind of stuff, when they don't hear from you, they're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And they might have been able to raise the alarm a lot earlier, but she was on the outs with them. So really it was just Jillian Stout, who unfortunately went out of town for that weekend. So she didn't notice until after she'd come back. So that definitely does kind of play into this case, just in that she wasn't noticed by any of these people because she wasn't really hanging with them because they were all mad at her. And they have all pretty much since said it was going to blow over. And I think that they're right. It's a typical teenage spat kind of bullshit. It would have blown over. Then they would have mended fences and been friends again after the fact. But we just, unfortunately, she disappeared and never got to that point. But it does kind of play into the fact that it took so long to discover that she was missing. But I've said before, and we'll really discuss in detail tonight, this rumor that Brianna was killed and then a table saw was used to cut up her body and she was fed to the pigs. And I bring that up now. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but I'm not going into all the nasty ass gory detail. That's as deep as I'm willing to go into that whole mess. But the reason that I bring it up now is Michael Stebbins he either owned, or I believe his parents owned, the property that was searched, where supposedly she was fed to the pigs, and this all thing went down. The police searched it. They didn't find anything about that. And then apparently they have other properties that they refuse to allow the cops to search. Whether that means something or not, we have no clue.
Kind of screams something to me.
It could. And it could also be like a parent being like, no, we've cooperated. You've run my son through the mud enough.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be that way. I can tell you straight up. I would be like, yeah, if there's a girl dead on my property, go find her.
Yeah.
Whatever you got to do, whatever you got to look through, go do it. I don't want nothing to do with that shit. We got to get this girl found.
Definitely.
If there's a possibility she's on my property, then absolutely. But from what I understand, they didn't. They allowed the police to search one property, which was the manure pit location, and then reportedly refused access to any of their other properties that they owned. And, like you said, that definitely fueled speculation about their involvement. But that's all. Just speculation.
Yeah.
We don't know.
It just feels shady.
I agree. I think it feels shady too, and it is very questionable why you would refuse a search. And this kind of maybe goes to, I've said before, like if one of my kids kills somebody, I'm turning their asses in. So I'm not going to protect them from that shit. And maybe it stems from these parents have a different view. Like, if he did something, we don't want anybody to know about it. So no, you're not searching. Or they knew that he did something. Who the hell knows?
Right.
You can guess all day. It might mean absolutely nothing. It might mean everything. But
True.
Without more evidence, the cops cannot get search warrants for the property. You can't get a search warrant on a rumor.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, everybody would be searched every day.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially in groups like this, because you've got rumors floating around all the time. But I wasn't able to find any arrest records for Stebbins, and I wasn't able to find that he was ever incarcerated or anything. I couldn't find where he lives now or what happened to him. I really don't know.
Okay.
It's the same thing I'm going to say over and over again in this whole...
Just start saying dittos. Ditto.
Yeah, with this whole case. Because it just is what it is. But I think that we need to talk a little bit about Brianna's drug use, because it comes up a lot in this case, and we know that because of it, she's linked to the dipshits. And so there are claims out there that she was a drug addict. And I find that very questionable for several different reasons we'll be talking about. But we do know that she was more than willing to do drugs and to try drugs in at least social settings. And we know for a fact that she had experimented with crack cocaine, which is a big one. And we know that she smoked a lot of pot, but who didn't at that age? You know what I mean?
I didn't.
And, at that age, I didn't smoke a lot of pot. I certainly smoked pot, but I didn't smoke a lot of pot. But, I just mean that in that not every single person does, but
yeah,
it's as common as saying what kid didn't drink.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
there's those, but
I didn't. I can, yeah.
It's not uncommon, I guess is what I should say. It's very common for teenage kids, both men and
to be trying stuff,
girls and boys, to be experimenting with marijuana, with alcohol. When you get up into the crack cocaine, that's a bit of a bigger stuff for sure. But it sounds like, she was
kind of playing with the big dogs.
Yeah. But it sounds like she was more than willing to use it recreationally. And, I don't know if there were any other drugs, but those two were definitely confirmed. We know for a fact because her friends have said, yeah, and her original group of friends were concerned about her because she had started to experiment with these at least stronger drugs, you know. I don't know if that group of friends smoked pot on a regular basis or at all. I don't know. I don't know if, you know, she started smoking pot about the same time. It's really unclear. And, you know, the best sources of information for, you know, stuff like that would be like parents, but parents are also the last to know when something like that's going on. So we don't really know. I do know that Overecker has said that she was using more drugs than what they had originally thought she was using, but by no means was she like a drug addict. And so when we talk about when she started using drugs, it really sounds like it began either shortly before or shortly after moving out of her parents' house, which would have been on or around her 17th birthday, which was August the 8th of 2003. So we're talking about a pretty short duration of time, it sounds like, that she would have been, you know, experimenting with drugs.
Right.
And, you know, full disclosure, I kind of take pot out of that. Maybe she was smoking pot before that. I don't really put it in the same category. To me, it's kind of in the same category as alcohol. So if she was, you know, if she was drinking, and yeah, I'm sure that she'd probably drank before she moved out on her own. She'd probably smoked pot before she moved out on her own. But it sounds like the experimentation with the heavier drugs started after she had moved out of her parents' house. So we're talking probably late 2003, early 2004. So not a whole long time before she went missing, it doesn't sound like.
Okay.
And friends noted that she had experimented with hard drugs, specifically crack cocaine, in the quote recent past before her disappearance. So, you know, that suggests a period of a few months. So maybe November 2003 to March 2004, something like that. But her move to live with friends, including her friend Jillian Stout in Sheldon, and her unstable living arrangements definitely exposed her to a crowd that involved a lot of partying and drug use. And it would have been a real step up from your typical high school parties. You know, we're talking about a drug house where you're going to parties, and those are a lot different parties than, you know, a field party or something like that, you know. And then we have the physical altercation with Keeley, which happened in February, which we're not going to dive too deep into on this episode, but her close friends informed police that Brianna had experimented with crack cocaine, but they did not describe her as a heavy user or an addict of any kind. It was characterized as recreational and primarily at parties and social gatherings like that. Brianna's parents, Bruce and Kelly, still maintain to this day that she was not seriously involved with drugs, and they reject any claims that her disappearance was drug related. They acknowledged that she likely experimented with drugs, but emphasized that she was certainly not an addict. And you'll see.
Well, addicts don't get their GEDs. They're not worried about it, is what I'm trying. I guess I just stereotyped a whole bunch of people, and I apologize for that. But, you know, the type of addict that people are trying to say that they are, she's not trying to get 2 jobs and get her GED.
Right. You know what I mean? With drug addicts, they're pretty much the same as alcoholics. So you can have very high-functioning addicts, the same as you can high-functioning alcoholics, or you can have those that it just decimates their life and they hardly leave the house and their life just falls apart on them.
Right.
And, you know, anything that you're doing to excess is going to lead to usually is going to lead to that inevitable life falls apart. But you know, I wanted to stress the length of time that we're talking about here because I think that it's important. And she could have been headed in that direction for sure. And had she not disappeared, who knows? From what I understand, the group of people that she ran around with is just exactly what you would expect from a group like this. Some of them are dead because they've OD'd or, whatever. Some of them got their shit together and, are now raising a family, married, all that kind of stuff. And some of them are like on the street, freaking strung out on drugs. And that's really what you would expect from a group like this. That's kind of how drugs work is, a certain percentage of them get hooked and it destroys the entire rest of their life. Then you're going to have a percentage of them that get hooked, but then are able to get clean and kind of get themselves cleaned up and move on with their life. And then you're going to have a certain percentage of them that die because of it.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have a certain percentage that it only ever was just a social type of thing. They did it a few times in school, and then once they got away from the crowd or whatever, they just never touched it again. So it's kind of all over the map, and there's no way to say what would have happened with Brianna. It could have been anything. But I do bring that up because it is possible, that she would have become a bad addict and it would have destroyed her life. It's possible, but I just don't see any indications during this period of time that that's where she was at. To your point, exactly what you said, she was working 2 damn jobs and going to school to get her GED, whether it was like a full-time GED program or part-time, I don't really know. It doesn't really matter because exactly like you said, somebody that's strung out on drugs is worrying about where they're going to get their next fix.
Yeah.
They're not worried about, are they going to pass their GED exam?
And everyone steam too. It wasn't mandated by anything. So.
Right. And from what I understand, she was eyeballing college. She was thinking about her future. That's just not the kind of shit you get from somebody that's strung out on drugs. Her ability to maintain that employment, her educational goals really suggest that her drug use did not significantly impair her daily functioning at all. And on the day of her disappearance, she appeared to be in good spirits. She met with her mom, whether it be for breakfast or after her test for lunch. We don't know for sure, but it doesn't really matter. We know that, like I said, she discussed college plans, which really contrasts with the behavior of somebody that's just deeply in the pit of addiction.
Right.
So we do know that the anonymous tip in 2004 alleged that Brianna was murdered by Ryans over a dispute involving, I think that the affidavit says, of course, the affidavit is not available public, but there's a lot of information out there on it. I think that was what the affidavit says is the dispute between Ryans and Brianna was over money that she had lent him to purchase crack cocaine. And that one is a really tough one for me to believe. Really tough. Because we're talking about a kid that had just started these 2 jobs.
Yeah.
And she was a dishwasher at one job and a server at another job.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about somebody that's rolling in the dough.
Yeah.
She's driving a 1985 Oldsmobile.
Yeah.
Which was a hand-me-down car from her grandpa. So we're not talking about somebody that's going to be able to pull out $1 or $2 or $10,000 and give it to a drug dealer to buy crack. But then you have the other side of that, and that is, okay, let's pretend for a moment that she did. Let's say she gave him $5,000. Okay, so he killed her?
Yeah.
What sense does that make?
Exactly.
Was she going to go to the cops and say, I gave him $5,000 and he won't give it back? What are the cops going to say? This is a civil deal. We don't get involved in that. You're going to have to take him to court. You really think that this 17-year-old is going to take him to court? No. Or he just says, yeah, I took your money. Now get lost. Stop bugging me about it. You ain't ever seen that shit again. That's the way it would go down. Nobody's going to kill somebody because they owe them money.
Yeah.
That's even dumber than she ran up a drug debt. theory in my mind. And so I just find nothing in that. I don't even find a kernel of possible truth in that. I'm sure that something like that has happened, but I don't know of one. I mean, I can think of multiple different cases where somebody owed somebody money and they killed them so they didn't have to pay it back. But that was because it was a legal debt that the court would enforce.
Okay.
They could take them to court and say, you owe me money. Or another case that I can think of off the top of my head is this one guy bought like a mobile home park from another guy and he was going to foreclose on it. So if they have something that they can lose out of the situation, then there might be a motive for murder. But we're talking about a 17-year-old girl and a crack dealer. What is she going to do to him?
Yeah. She doesn't have enough teeth to do anything.
There's nothing. Legally, she's not going to go to the cops and say, I loaned you money for drugs. That would be as dumb as the bitch that called the cops to ask them to test her methamphetamine.
Yeah.
So I just think it's absolutely absurd. So the other part of that would be that she ran up a drug debt, which, we'll be talking about. But I think that it's really important at this point to bring up another woman. And this woman was named Legia Ray or Gia Collins. So Gia Collins was born November 2nd, 1978, which would have made her 25 years old in 2004. And Gia disappeared July 5th, 2004 from Burlington, Vermont. So this would have been a few months after Brianna disappeared. And then Ryans, keep in mind, had moved to Burlington, Vermont shortly after Brianna's disappearance. So Legia Collins was born in Long Beach, California, and she was of Korean descent. And she had moved out there to attend the South Burlington schools, and she'd earned herself an associate's degree in liberal arts from the Community College of Vermont. And she did that in May 2002. She enjoyed ice skating, drawing, music, playing the saxophone, and she was a devoted mother to her two young sons, which were 7 and 14 months at the time. And they were left in the care of family members after her death. She's described as being 5 foot 4 inches tall, 180 to 200 pounds, with a nose ring and long dark hair. So she was last seen by her live-in boyfriend around midnight on July 4, 2004 in Burlington, leaving her St. Paul Street home to visit a male friend's residence, but she never arrived. She was reported missing by her boyfriend about 9 o'clock on July 5th, 2004, and her 96 Ford Escort station wagon was also missing and was not reported as recovered. So I don't know if they ever found the thing or not. But Collins was linked to the same drug trafficking network that Brianna Maitland was affiliated with, especially through Ramon Ryans. Because like I'd said, he had moved into that apartment after his April 2004 arrest. So initially, he was a very prime suspect in her disappearance. But come to find out, another bitch by the name of Ellen Ducharme pleaded guilty to her murder, and it's a freaking terrible story. So you're trying to make sense out of something that an absolute lunatic drug addict is telling. So best of luck to you. But either one of two things happened. So either it was an argument over drugs or it was an argument over a gun. I don't know. I know that Ellen in court, she's in court, and the judge is reading off the charges, and he says something about it being an argument over drugs, and she continually interrupts the judge saying it was a gun. It was a gun. It was an argument about a gun. It wasn't about drugs. It was about a gun.
Well, then.
So whether she was trying to, make it better because it wasn't drugs,
Which one's better? I don't
whether it was really an argument over a gun, and I guess it's really neither here nor there, but come to find out, she beats Legia Collins with a baseball bat in the head in her kitchen. And then this poor girl is laying on the floor bleeding and not dead. And this Ellen Duchamon, or whatever the hell her name is, she just basically stood there and watched her die.
Lovely.
Yeah. And so Ellen was dating another guy by the name of Moses Robar. And again, all these names I brought up last episode.
Oh, no.
But now here we go again. So this piece of shit was 52 years old, and he was a resident of Burlington as well. He owned a 91 Chevy pickup that was impounded by police in mid-July 2004. And that truck was believed to have been used to transport Collins's body or some other evidence. And from what I understand, he was at work. He was some kind of a laborer. I'm not entirely sure what he did, but he was at work and was on his lunch break, I believe, and was sitting like on the tailgate of a truck. And the cops kind of come around and he pulls out a gun and blows his head off.
Oof.
So he's dead. He commits suicide when the cops go to arrest him for his involvement in this murder. It doesn't sound like he was involved in the murder itself. It sounds like he was involved in the disposal of the body, but that's a pretty drastic reaction, which really makes me wonder what all was this guy involved in?
Yeah, there had to have been more.
And I'm certainly not linking him to Brianna. I don't think that there is a link there. That's not what I'm saying, but it just seems to me like he almost would have had to have been involved in something bigger than that.
Yeah.
Because
that's a lot.
It's a lot. And from what I understand, Vermont's like really willing to let people out of jail and make all kinds of deals. And it's harder as shit to get anybody to actually be penalized for anything. So the likelihood that an accomplice to a murder would be able to work some kind of a deal, testify against his girlfriend, and maybe even walk seems pretty high. So it really just makes you go, I wonder what we don't know about this guy.
If he had something pending somewhere else.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We don't know. But he was the live-in boyfriend of Ellen Ducharme and was an acquaintance of Collins through the whole drug scene. So just like a little bit farther north in the Montgomery area, all these druggies are hanging out together. They all know each other. They're all cut from the same kind of cloth. And that includes his brother, Moses's brother, Daryl Robar, who was potentially involved as well, though details are sparse and totally unconfirmed. But Daryl is named in all kinds of information that I was able to find on Reddit and those kind of sites, but nothing official, no news sites or anything like that. And then we have Tim Collins, who was also potentially involved in her disappearance. I mean, you've got this whole bunch of these freaking drug people, and they seem that they're all... It's almost incestuous, I mean, they're involved in everybody else's stuff. And so anytime something bad happens with one, it's like they're all linked together.
Mm-hmm.
And in that aspect, it kind of would fit with the Brianna Maitland case. Whether she was killed over the drug thing or by any of these asshats or not, we don't know. But in my opinion, it took more than one person to pull off her disappearance. I don't think it could have possibly been a single person. So it took a group, or at least two, at the bare minimum two. And this group definitely does fit that anyway. So there's really no other specifics about the murder of Legia Collins, except her body was disposed of in a wooded area in Ripton, Vermont, which was approximately 40 miles south of Burlington. And then it wasn't found until August. And once it was found, then the coroner confirmed that she was killed by repeated blows to the head with a baseball bat, which was then confirmed in court records. And that she didn't die immediately. She actually laid at Ducharme's feet in her kitchen. And Ducharme, didn't call 911, didn't try to help, nothing. And Burlington police confirmed that the killing was tied to the drug trade, likely involving crack cocaine. The defense claimed that it stemmed from a fight over a gun, which, I already kind of said that it was not a robbery. But the judge, his name was Judge Cooper Smith, rejected the defense's claim that it was mitigating, citing the brutality of Ducharme's failure to aid her friend. And then Collins's body was transported, likely using Moses's 1991 Chevy pickup, to the Ripton Forest, where it remained undiscovered for nearly a month. And then the blue 96 Ford Escort station wagon was missing at the time of her disappearance, and I couldn't find anywhere where it had been recovered. I don't know if it ever was or if it I have no freaking clue. So Ellen Ducharme pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in July of 2005, and she was sentenced to 25 years to life in August of 2005. And that the judge said that was based on the brutality and the failure to seek any sort of help or anything. Like we said, Moses Robar committed suicide. Timothy Cruz was named as an accomplice in some sources, but there's no record of any charges or any sentencing linked to this. And the same thing with Daryl Robar. He's mentioned as an accomplice, but I don't think he was ever charged. I don't think there was evidence to charge him. Whether he was involved or not, we have no clue. And then Ramon Ryans was not charged in Collins's murder. And so we just don't know.
Okay.
We know that it was part of the same drug scene, but outside of Ellen Ducharme, we don't know who was involved. But Ellen Ducharme, then I think that her son was going to get arrested. And so she said, if you arrest my son, I'll never tell you what happened to Brianna. And then she gives this affidavit saying that she is the reason for the whole Brianna was killed, taken to a hog farm, cut up with a table saw, and fed to the pigs. That all came from Ellen Ducharme in an attempt to keep her son from being arrested. Right. But there were several things in that affidavit that the police were able to prove just simply were not possible. And it sounds like she changed her story a number of different times. And so I don't really think that we can put any stock whatsoever into that theory.
Right. Okay.
Because of who it's coming from and the reason for it. Right. She's trying to broker a deal.
Say anything, yeah.
For her son. But so like I said before, with this whole group of asshats and their drug dealers and everything, the two theories that have come up, which I've already mentioned, were that Brianna either one, racked up a huge drug debt, or two, she loaned them money and they killed her for it. And so, in so many of these cases, so many of them, when somebody goes missing or something, it comes out that there's a drug angle to this case. There's a drug. I hear it all the time. And so I did a little bit of digging into just, how prevalent that really is and how likely you are, if you're a drug user, how likely you are to be a victim of homicide. So in the United States, drug-related homicides constitute less than 1% of all drug-related deaths. And, like debt-specific murders, somebody that gets killed because they owe a debt, is even considerably smaller than that. So I found a 1981 New York study that indicates that 42% of homicides at that time were drug-related, but with only 50 total homicides. So that's only 21 cases that were used in that study, which isn't a very large sampling to say much at all. So the Collins murder is one of the very few documented drug-related homicides in 2004 in Vermont. No other cases in the region explicitly cite drugs, and especially not drug debt, as any kind of a motive. And then when you go globally, it's even a smaller percentage. So it's not like it's hard to come up with specific numbers and say, this percentage of people gets killed because of a drug debt, because it's really not reported. It's almost impossible to find those kind of things. But all the research that I did, it really shows that murders over drug debts are very rare, constituting a small fraction of all the drug-related homicides. And the drug-related homicides are less than 1% of all the drug-related deaths. So we're talking about considerably less than 1% of people that are killed because of a drug debt.
Okay.
And then I also wanted to kind of try to figure out, if Brianna was a user, what level are we talking about to constitute enough money to warrant killing somebody over?
Right.
And so I did a lot of research into that. And, it's kind of all over the map as far as usage patterns and stuff like that. But occasional users, who I defined as somebody that uses crack cocaine sporadically, usually just in a social setting, like parties or something, no regular pattern of dependency or anything like that. So they might use like once every few weeks or once every few months or something like that. So they're going to use typically between 0.1 and 0.5 grams per time that they use, which is going to be equivalent to about 1 to 5 rocks, because each rock is roughly 1/10 of a gram. So the total monthly usage for somebody like that would be between 0.1 and maybe 1 gram or less. So it's very infrequent. The cost of crack in 2004 was between $10 and $50 a gram, just depending on where you were at. So a person like that would run up.
Your Google search is insane now.
My Google search.
What's he doing?
Yeah, if the FBI ever searches my computer, they're gonna determine that I'm definitely a serial killer. This freaking lunatic is all I said is murder and drugs, and
he's an electrician. Case closed.
Yep.
I'm never gonna let that go.
Oh, I know. I wouldn't expect you to. So a user like that, an occasional user, would spend anywhere between $20 and $100 a month using.
Okay.
And that really is the category that I think Brianna slips into. So we're not talking about a great deal of money. Even $100 a month, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that great. The next category would be regular users, which I defined as users that use crack cocaine consistently, weekly, or at least bi-weekly, with some psychological dependence, but not necessarily like a daily user that's suffering from a severe addiction. Their usage is going to be about double, about 0.5 to 2 grams per session, or 5 to 20 rocks spread over a weekend or maybe multiple days. So a typical week's worth of use would be 1 to 5 grams. Monthly would be 4 to 20, which would run them between $160 and $800 a month. So in 2004 money, that's getting up there where it's difficult for somebody to pay for their drugs, but you're still going to have to go a lot of months before you've racked up enough money for somebody to kill you over. And then with chronic users that are using crack daily, or at least almost every day, they're going to have significant physical and psychological dependence.
Yeah.
It's going to impact their daily functioning. I think we can easily say that Brianna most certainly did not fit into this category.
It's going to alter. Why was that word hard? It's going to alter their physical appearance, and the last known pictures of her in a stereotypical way don't have that alteration.
Well, are you familiar with the picture of her? It's like a profile. She's in a red shirt, and it's kind of like a profile. It's probably the most famous picture of her. It's kind of everywhere, but she's kind of standing there. She kind of has a kind of a almost like a shit-eating grin on her face. You know, that was taken the night before she disappeared. So that's a very recent picture. And to your point, she's showing no physical indications of like drug dependent. And she just passed her GED that morning. So again, you know,
I mean, we come back to that. So
right. So, but a chronic user is going to use anywhere between 1 and 5 grams per day, or 10 to 50 rocks. And that's going to depend on each individual user, but that's going to mean that their total weekly usage is between 7 and 35 grams, monthly 30 to 150. It's going to run them anywhere between $2,000 and $10,000 a month. So now you're getting up into the neighborhood of a lot of freaking money, a lot of money. But from what I understand, from what research showed, this was way less common in Vermont due to the limited supply and the cost. You know, this is something you're going to see on the streets of New York or something like that. It's not. I'm not saying that somebody in Vermont couldn't develop a habit like this. I'm just saying that it's going to be difficult for them to maintain because there's just not that much crack available. To my knowledge, we've got like 2 crack dealers in the area, and they're working together. So you're basically going to just decimate their stock.
Yeah.
And then if those people wouldn't be considered crackheads, then the next, which I labeled as crackhead level users, which I defined as severe compulsive daily use with extreme dependency characterized by a total loss of control, social isolation, and significant health deterioration. And we all know these people. Well, maybe we all don't, but I damn sure have known some of these people, not necessarily on crack, because crack was just not a thing here, but with meth.
Meth was,
for sure. And it's going to be very similar, but these people are going to use between 5 and 10 grams more a day, 50 to over 100 rocks, and often in continuous binges that last days. They're pretty much high all the time. Is if they get their hands on it, they're high, and they're going to do anything they possibly can to get their hands on it, which means they're going to be using between 35 and over 70 grams a week, 150 to over 300 in a month.
That's a lot.
Which is going to run them between $10,000 and $20,000 a month. And these last 2 groups, the crackhead level and the chronic users, these are most certainly the ones that are going to resort to crime in order to fuel their drug habit, because there's no way they're going to be able to be legally making $10,000 to $20,000 a month, you know, working at the Whataburger or the Sonic or whatever.
They're stealing from it, I guess.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They have to be involved in illegal activity to be able to fund their drug debt. And this is even more rare in rural Vermont in 2004. It's likely that they wouldn't even be able to get to this level. They'd almost have to like go into New York City or something like that in order to be able to. They'd probably just end up on the streets in New York, honestly. And so that just kind of gives you an idea of the money that we're talking about.
A lot of money.
A lot of money for your chronic and crackheads. Yeah. But not a lot of money if you're talking about an occasional user who's using it maybe in social settings at parties and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I didn't see this reported anywhere, but my own personal feelings on this is that it's very likely that Ryans and Jackson were trying to get her hooked. So she may have not even been paying for it. They might have been offering it to her for free, because that's really common.
Taking it out in trade.
Yeah, or it's available at a party. That's very common with drug dealers is they'll bring it out at a party. It's basically like giving free samples of anything.
Yeah.
It's like Costco. They set up their little stations at the end of the aisle so you could try their wonderful hot dogs or whatever.
Drugs at Costco.
And that's basically what drug.
Oh, meth is in aisle 3.
Yeah, well, it's essentially what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then after a few parties like that, when they get somebody that really likes it, then they come back and then they start buying from them, become a customer, and then
you have to get a membership, and it's just a big
it's
mess.
a freaking nightmare. Yeah. So
I'd smile a little bit and all this dark shit.
So if we're talking about Brianna being killed for a drug debt, then I went through the usage and how much we would expect her to have been spending a month on it if she was spending anything. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, so how much debt are we talking about for somebody to warrant murder over, And so it really depends, because if it's like a personal relationship, then that number is going to be a lot smaller. If you owe your friend or somebody that they're probably going to start hounding you a lot quicker. If it's like organized crime or something like that, they're going to let that debt get a lot larger for obvious reasons. And
consequences are better.
Well, it's not only that, but a couple things. One is they're building a long-term customer and getting you good and solidly hooked. And then two, because it's not common to kill somebody over drug debt. That's why a large organization like organized crime or something like that is going to wait. They're going to try everything they possibly can. They're going to break your legs. They're going to break your fingers. They're going to try everything they possibly can before they resort to murder, because that's the worst possible thing for them. Unless they're making a statement, which I've mentioned before. But as far as just killing somebody because they're not going to pay you, it's not that freaking common, because you're never going to get paid then.
Yeah.
And then if you look at like the local market dynamics in rural Vermont in 2004, it's likely that smaller debts could lead to violence just based on limited cash flow. It's not a large organized crime deal, but you still got to ask yourself, like, okay, but what is the number? Because murder is a big damn step. And like I said a minute ago, you're never getting paid.
You can't unring that bell.
Right. And so murders in this setting, in this situation, murders usually stem from the perceived disrespect or a fear of snitching or retaliation, not the debt. And so it makes it really hard to define, and I knew that it would when I started researching this. I certainly didn't expect it to be like, oh, well, the number is $3,474. Once you go to $75, $3,475, then we'll kill you.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that at all, but I was very surprised to find that it's even more rare than I thought that it was. And so I was thinking that, I know that it's not that common for the reasons I've already said, but I thought it was a whole hell of a lot more common than it is.
Right.
We're talking less. It was like, we'll get there, but it's way less than 1%. The likelihood of a drug debt leading to murder, you kind of look at all of the homicides and then you extrapolate from that. So drug-related homicides, which I mentioned before, are a small fraction of the total homicides altogether. And then debt-specific homicides are even a smaller subset than that. So we're talking way, 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 way less than 1% of all the homicides are drug-related, which is a minuscule little amount. And then that brings us to the next part, which my, broken brain had to dive into. And that is because I made the comment last episode that it seems like anymore, ever since Robert Pinkton was busted in Canada, everybody that goes missing is fed to the freaking pigs.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so I was like, okay, so how common is this really, that a murder victim is disposed of by feeding them to the pigs? And so my broken brain had to dive into it and figure it out. So
Is it even more broken now from figuring it all out?
probably.
Okay.
So I had to find out just how many people we're talking about that we've confirmed has fed their victims to the pigs. Obviously, at the very top of that list is Robert Pickton. And for those that don't know, Robert Pickton was a serial killer that was operating in the Port Coquitlam area of British Columbia, Canada from 1995 to 2002. And he was a pig farmer. He was convicted of 6 counts of murder, but they've confirmed so they went into this pig farm after all of this kind of shit broke, and they went into this pig farm and they went looking, and they confirmed 33 different DNA sources. So it's likely that he had at least 33 victims. He was convicted of 6 and he confessed to 49.
Holy moly.
So we're talking about a large number of victims up in that area during that period of time. And they were all very similar to every other serial killer, or most serial killer victims. They were the marginalized in society, a lot of whom were prostitutes and, druggies and stuff like that he would...
quote unquote expendables.
Yeah. And that's just exactly how he treated them. I mean, he was a rare one because some of them lived with him and loved him to death. He was filthy freaking rich. And he gave tons of money to all kinds of people. So the one girl that was living there with him, she went out looking for him because they picked up this girl and brought her back to the pig farm to party with them. And then Robert Pickton and this girl were out in another shed or some shit like this. And this girl went out there and found the other girl hanging from the ceiling. And I mean, so some he would kill, some he wouldn't kill. The one, and I think it was that one, he wanted to marry. And so he's all over the map. He's not your run-of-the-mill serial killer. And he definitely killed both females and males. So I don't know. But he's by far the most well-known. And then Susan Monica. I don't know if you know about Susan Monica. Okay, so Susan Monica was, and I don't know what the proper term is, but a transvestite. And I think a transvestite is somebody that has actually had the surgery. So I don't know. I do not believe that Susan Monica had the surgery, but she was living on this place in, I think it was in California. It was like a 20-acre pig farm. And she killed at least 2 people and cut them up and fed them to the pigs. And she claimed that it was self-defense and that it was a mercy killing, but it was almost certainly murder. And so she used her pigs to get rid of the bodies. And then we have Adrian Jones, which I had never heard of this case before, but it was a little 7-year-old boy who was starved and tortured and then killed by his father and his stepmother in 2015, and his remains were fed to the pigs. And then we have Maria Macgato and Lucia Nudlovo in South Africa. Definitely hadn't heard of these, but it was another one, 2 confirmed victims fed to pigs. Francisco Racasta in Italy in 2012 confirmed that he killed 1 and fed the victim to pigs. And so when you tally all of that up, the estimates are roughly 20,000 homicides annually, and that's from the Centers of Disease Control. So if I take that over a 20-year span, that's roughly 400,000 homicides. And then if you look at the pig disposal cases, because you really got to take Pigton out because he's an outlier. I mean, And so if you take Picton out, that leaves roughly 3 victims. With Picton, it's at least 33. And then, you have the South African one, the Italy one. So globally, we're talking over a 20-year period of about 9,028,000 homicides a year, or over a 20-year period. Of those 9 million, 39 of them are confirmed to have been fed to pigs. And so when you do the calculation, the U.S. calculation, pig disposal accounts for less than 0.001% of U.S. homicides. The Canadian calculation with Picton is 0.275%, which is very high because of the one dude.
Now that you're back to Picton, do you want me to explain?
I was talking about Susan Monica. If you're
shit, yes, I am.
But yes, go for it.
So, did Susan Monica actually decide, call me female?
Yes.
Okay. 100% transgender then. Transvestite refers to cross-dressing. If they just, for their own personal excitement, wear the other gender's clothing, but they still identify as the gender they were born at.
Okay.
So she was transgender.
Okay. All right.
There you go. Learn some lessons.
Thank you for that.
Back to the crap.
Okay, so then when we're talking about the likelihood of pig disposal as a method, there's some factors that you have to look at, and one is access to pigs. Like, how many people have a rural setting that is a pig farm where you can feed people to pigs? And granted, pigs will consume remains, but not instantaneously. It's not like, putting somebody through a tree chipper or something like that. I mean, it takes a little bit of time, but they're pretty voracious eaters. So as gruesome as it is to think about, it doesn't take as long as you would think it would, but it does take a little bit of a while. So globally, the likelihood of a murder involving pig disposal is about 0.00042%. So really, really, really small. It's extremely rare due to the specific conditions that are required. Like I said, the pig farm access, and not only a pig farm access, but a pig farm that's rural enough that you can, and nobody's going to be coming by for long enough that just knowing somebody that has a pig farm isn't enough, because the person that owns the pig farm is going to have to be involved in the disposal, because they're going to notice that somebody's feeding people to their pigs.
Jeez.
So it's so much less than 1% that it's a tiny little minuscule amount of people over the course of time. So although this comes up a lot, that somebody was fed to the pigs, you hear it all the freaking time, the likelihood is very small that almost nobody will. And I think before Robert Picton was arrested, you never heard about this shit at all. But after that, then it was like the hot topic, and now everybody's like, oh, they got fed to the pigs.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the next thing that I wanted to take a look at, and I hope I'm not boring the shit out of everybody with all this math, but
all the math,
it's intriguing to me, and I think that it's important because I really put it all in here just to display how unlikely some of these scenarios are that people are claiming for Brianna. And so then the next thing I wanted to talk about was the risk categories of potential victims. So, and in coming up with this, you look at things like age, race, sex, their socioeconomic status, their lifestyle, situational factors, and So the first category is a very low risk category, which would be individuals with minimal exposure to violence, living in safe environments like rural or suburban areas with very low crime rates, maintaining very secure routines, locking their doors all of the time, avoiding nightlife, having very stable socioeconomic status. This is a category that typically includes older adults, over 65 years old, females, or those in low crime professions like office workers or retirees. Some examples of this would be elderly women in rural Vermont, suburban families with stable incomes, or individuals with no criminal or high-risk social ties. And so for somebody that's in that very low risk category, their homicide risk is about 0.5 to 2 per 100,000, which means the percentage chance that they're going to be a victim of homicide would be between 0.0005 and 0.002. So very small chance. The next category would be the low risk category, which would be individuals with stable lives, but occasional exposure to moderate risk settings, urban workplaces, occasional nightlife. This includes middle-aged adults, 45 to 64, those in semi-urban areas or with minor social risks like casual bar visits. They're typically employed with limited contact with high crime groups. An example of that would be a middle-aged professional living in Burlington, Vermont, or individuals with routine but not isolated lifestyles. And so for that category, the homicide risk is between 2 to 5 per 100,000 or 0.002 to 0.005%. So still a very small percent. And honestly, the vast majority of us probably fall in one of those two categories, you know. And then you have the medium risk category, which would be young adults, 18 to 44, particularly females.
Just past.
Who venture into riskier settings like nightlife, urban areas at night, or have social ties to less stable groups. It may include students, part-time workers, or those with occasional exposure to crime-prone environments. Brianna Maitland at 17 attended parties with some unstable living arrangements. She would have fit into this group. Young adults in semi-urban settings with social exposure to nightlife. But even still, their homicide risk is between 5 and 10 per 100,000 or 0.005 to 0.01%. So still very small. Then you go into the high risk category, which is individuals in high crime environments with risky lifestyles, frequent nightlife, unstable housing, ties to criminal networks, not necessarily drug specific. This includes young males, racial and ethnic minorities, and those in urban high crime areas. So an example of this would be a young man in urban centers, individuals with criminal acquaintances, or those with unstable socioeconomic status. And their homicide risk is between 20 and 50 per 100,000 or 0.02 to 0.05%. And then we move into the very high risk category, which is individuals directly engaged in high risk activities. This is going to be your sex workers, gang members, or those involved in other criminal enterprises, or living in extremely high crime areas. And so, you know, example of that is exactly what I said, you know, a prostitute in an urban center, or a gang member, or a homeless person that's in a high crime area or something like that. But I found this very surprising. Their homicide risk is between 50 and 100 per 100,000. So even in the very high risk category, your risk of dying by homicide is still between 0.05 and 0.1%. So still way less than 1% chance that you're going to be a victim of homicide. So my conclusion from that was that it's very unlikely that Brianna was killed because of any sort of a drug debt. I don't think that we can discount these douchebags, but on the other side of the coin, I also can't say because they're douchebags, they have to be the ones that killed her.
True.
Statistically, you're way more likely to become the victim of somebody that you know well and are involved with than with definitely than with a stranger, but it's your risk of being a victim of somebody kind of goes up the better that you know them. We know that statistically, you're most likely to be killed by a close friend or romantic acquaintance. You know, those that are closest to us are the most likely to kill us. And so the farther away we get, the less, isn't it? It's completely jacked up, but it's the truth. And as we get farther away socially, then the risk of becoming a victim of them goes down as well. So it's completely backwards of the way that it should be.
Yeah, that's weird.
But, you know, hopefully I didn't bore everybody completely to death tonight, but I've found that I think that it's really important to discuss this in this way, because as you look into this case and you start doing the research, it's almost like everybody's already made their minds up that it has to have been Ryans and Jackson because they were pieces of shit. And you know me, I'm going to call them pieces of shit if they're pieces of shit. And so I'm certainly not saying that these are good guys or anything like that. They've been at least peripherally involved in her disappearance. They've also been, or at least Ryan's was peripherally involved in the murder of Legia Collins. So these are douchebags. They're worthless pieces of shit. But that doesn't necessarily make them killers. And if they were involved, and I'm certainly not discounting them because they may have been involved.
Right.
But if they were involved, I think it would be far more likely that, considering the setting, this odd way that her car was found backed in, you know, I would say that it would be very likely that it could be something similar to like the Crystal Reisinger case where Brianna had been sexually assaulted and was talking about going to the cops or something like that. And so they get rid of her so that she doesn't. The way that she disappeared, it doesn't really seem to feel like that for me. The other thing that I would think of with these pieces of shit, if they're involved, is not that she loaned them money. I think that's the dumbest freaking thing I've ever heard of. And not that she racked up this big drug debt that they killed her over. That's like the second dumbest freaking thing I've heard of. Just based on her age and the amount of time that she had, all the shit that we've been talking about, it's just not likely.
Right.
What would be more likely, in my opinion, is if her and Ryans were running around together, she saw something that she wasn't supposed to see. What that is, who the hell knows? But, you know, I think that we've seen something, we at least suspect something similar in the Candace Hiltz case, where she saw, you know, a druggie paying off law enforcement. You know, if she saw, I don't know, somebody farther up the chain that she wasn't supposed to see, or she saw them hurt or kill somebody else, or she, whatever, who the hell knows? We could theorize about what she's seen all day, but I think it would be far more likely that she saw something that would be a threat to them than she owed them too much money.
Right.
That to me just seems a little bit ludicrous. But when I first started digging into this case, I was convinced that it was tied to these two shitheads. And the more that I've researched it, the less convinced about that I've become. And the sad part about that is the more then confused I've become, because I don't have another really good viable suspect.
I don't have another avenue.
In this. Right. It's like every avenue that you go down is a big question mark. And it kind of makes me think that that's why the case hasn't been solved. And it really makes me wonder that if we solve this case, if it's not going to be somebody that we haven't even talked about. I went through this whole freaking list of names last week. I went through a big portion of the names this week, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's like Bob Jones. And you're like, who the freaking hell is Bob? Well, we don't know, but we found DNA that makes us know it was Bob. And everybody's scratching their heads like, how in the hell does she even know who this? It wouldn't surprise me if it was something like that.
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't surprise me if...
Very well might be.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if it was somebody that become fixated on her at her job. The one thing that kind of is a hang up for that is she hadn't worked there that long. And, you know, there is no, that I know of, there's no reports of like stalking behavior or anything like that. But I did learn this week that her car was broken into twice shortly before this at KJ's Diner, I believe. Not saying that it's related at all, but it's interesting. And it does then make me kind of wonder a little bit more about that stalkery type person. Yeah. You know, who knows? She was a very beautiful young girl, you know, so it's possible that some freaking weirdo got just infatuated with her at one of her jobs or something. You know, that's always a possibility. Yeah. But this one's a lot harder for me. It's probably the hardest one that we've researched so far because the more I know, the less I know.
That's terrible.
It's freaking awful.
Yeah.
But I think that, honestly, I think that the private investigators are kind of in the same boat. They're like, and they know this shit way better than I do. Right. They've been at it and one correction that I do need to make, and I'm glad I thought of it, is last week I kind of made it sound like Lou Berry had been on this investigation almost as long as Greg Overecker. In truth, he's like 10 years later. Oh, okay. So Greg Overecker has been on this since like 2006, so not very long after. And then Lou Berry quite a bit after that. So I just wanted to clear that up. But...
how dare you?
I know, how dare I get some shit wrong, huh?
Dad blasted John.
But, you know, I don't think that, well, I know for a fact that they don't. I think they have their suspicions, just like all of us do, you know, but I don't think that they're like locked on, like, you know, again, with like Crystal Reisinger's case, I feel very confident. We'll be covering that for the listeners that don't know, but her case in particular, I feel like we know exactly who killed her. It's just a matter of finding her body and the evidence to prosecute. But in Brianna's case, everybody's got a theory. You know, and I'm sure we're going to post these videos and we're going to get comments like we did on the Maura Murray video from somebody that knows exactly what happened. Nobody knows exactly what happened. And if you do, then you need to be in jail.
You need to be talking.
Well, you need to be in jail because you've been hiding this. You're either involved or you've been hiding this information for freaking 20 years. So you're a piece of shit. But, you know, I get a kick out of that because then you see that when you're researching these cases, when you get on the Reddit threads and you start seeing them and people are interacting and everybody knows. Everybody knows exactly what happened. Yeah. Ironically, what everybody knows is completely different and couldn't all be true at the same time. So that tells me everybody must be wrong because there's no possible way everybody can be right.
Makes you want to jump in there and say, then why haven't you solved it if you know?
Exactly.
Well, is this an open case?
Exactly.
If you know.
And I do get a kick out of the two private investigators, Lou and Craig, because they'll say, oh yeah, we've gone through so many investigators that will come and say, you know, they'll come and this happened with Bruce before Greg came around and Bruce and Kelly were pretty much done with it by the time Greg come up because these people would come and they would say, yeah, we can solve this, you know, just tell us everything that you know and we'll have it solved. And then a week later, they're like out because I don't know. I have no freaking clue. And this idea that
I misspoke.
This idea that you can solve a case like this that's 20 some years old by just going and looking at some stuff like, I'm sorry, unless something breaks, and hopefully we have that in this case. Hopefully this new eyewitnesses and this gray or silver Honda is going to, you know, amount to something, but that's what it's going to take to break this case. And unfortunately, in both of these cases, the Brianna Maitland case and the Maura Murray case, I don't think we have DNA as an option either. So it's really just comes down to somebody needs to talk, or we need to identify witnesses that saw something. So with that, the deeper that we go into Brianna Maitland's story, the more tangled that it becomes. Drugs are part of that tangle, whether as a peripheral influence or something more central. Brianna was young, independent, and struggling in ways that left her vulnerable. We know she was experimenting. We know she had friends who were deep in it, selling, using, running with people whose names come up again and again in conversations that get real quiet when law enforcement walks in. But here's the thing. Using drugs doesn't make someone disposable, and it doesn't mean that they deserved what happened to them. It's true that drug involvement can increase someone's risk of being a victim of violent crime. There's hard data behind that, but it doesn't guarantee that's what led to her disappearance. Sometimes it's just a red herring. Sometimes it's just one layer in a much more complex reality. People like Ryans and Jackson, yeah, they're what you'd call walking cautionary tales. Worthless asshats, to be blunt. They've said some vile things. They've been tied to shady dealings, and yes, they've been investigated extensively. Some might argue too extensively, to the point where other leads may have been overlooked, while everyone focused on these two like they were the end-all answer. That's where we want to raise a red flag, not to defend these pieces of shit, but to remind everyone that tunnel vision kills cases. If we lock in on one theory because it's convenient or because it checks some of the ugly boxes, we risk missing the truth altogether. And there are other plausible scenarios, ones that have nothing to do with drugs, that may be even more likely than the underworld narrative. Was Brianna a target of someone older, someone dangerous, someone who saw a girl without a safety net and took advantage of that? Was it someone she trusted or someone just passing through? In truth, we don't know. And that's the hardest part, but we owe it to her not just to chase the loudest theory, but to chase the right ones. Wherever it leads, how uncomfortable it gets, because until the truth comes out, every path deserves light, and Brianna deserves more than silence. Before she became a missing person on a poster, before her name was etched into the cold lexicon of unsolved cases, Brianna Maitland was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a teenager trying to forge a life of her own in a world that wasn't always kind. She was contradictions made flesh, fiercely independent, but still just a kid learning how to live on her own. Tough as nails from farm chores and martial arts, but with a shy, crooked smile that gave her away when she let her guard down. She loved horses and Bon Jovi and driving with the windows down. She could throw a punch at the mat or recite lines from Kill Bill. She was magnetic. People noticed her when she walked into a room, and she didn't crave attention. She craved control over her life. And like so many kids in small towns, Brianna lived in a space between too mature for her age and too young for the world that she was stepping into. She couch surfed and kept secrets. She worked hard and held tight to a dream of something better. She was complicated. She made mistakes. She trusted the wrong people sometimes, but she was trying. She is not the rumors that followed her. She is not the worst choices of the people she knew. She is not just a mystery. Her name deserves more than to be passed around in online forums and true crime gossip. Her memory is more than the cracked barn where her car was found and the grainy photo of that crooked bumper. Her life, though short, mattered. Brianna Maitland was real, and she was ours. We don't know who took her away or why, but we do know what she deserves: truth, justice, and to be remembered for who she was, not just how she left. And until we have answers, we'll keep speaking her name. Cocaine, meth, pills. Small town addiction leaves a trail of pain, debt, and desperation, and sometimes disappearance. In Franklin County, Vermont, that underworld wasn't a rumor. It was real, and Brianna Maitland, like too many others, was close enough to feel its heat. But proximity isn't proof. Being young, being vulnerable, even being around drugs, it might raise risk, but it doesn't erase humanity, and it doesn't write the ending.
We've heard the names Ryans, Jackson, others too toxic to speak in polite company. Some of them may know more than they're saying, but let's be clear. These men have been investigated, not cleared, but scrutinized heavily, and still no resolution. That means we have to keep all the theories viable, no matter how loud one might seem.
Tunnel vision solves nothing. If we obsess over one angle, drugs, revenge, a bad debt, we risk missing the truth hiding in plain sight. Brianna may have been pulled into a world that she didn't fully understand, or it may be something else entirely. That car didn't just end up in the barn by coincidence. That night wasn't just bad luck.
If you believe in what we're doing, if you want to help push the investigation forward, go to darkdialogue.com. There you can support us through Patreon or Ko-fi, adopt a victim like Brianna for focused research, or join the Dark Dialogue Collective. We're not here for entertainment. We're here to find answers.
And if you know something, anything about Brianna's life, her social circle, that night at the Black Lantern Inn, or what could have gone down on Route 118, reach out. Email us at info@darkdialogue.com or contact Vermont State Police at 802-524-5993 or the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. There's still a $40,000 reward for information that leads to Brianna.
You can also send tips anonymously, and if you're scared, unsure, or don't know who to trust, reach out to us. We'll help you get it into the right hands. No judgment, no names.
17 years old, she passed her GED that morning. She had plans, and somebody took them from her. It's time to take that power back.
Support, share, speak. Do not let this case fade into the background noise.
There's still time for truth, still a path to justice. And until we find it, keep listening, keep digging, keep asking, and keep the dialogue alive.